Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalat, wassalam ala rasulillah. My name is Jimmy E. Jones. I am on the faculty and the executive vice president of the Islamic Seminary of America. Welcome to something that we call TISA Talks, a series that we feel that provides both ilm and context, that is text and context. So I like to call it ilm that you can use. The people that are involved in this effort to educate the next generation of Muslim leadership are people who have deep learning when it comes to traditional Islamic studies, as well as going to contemporary institutions to put the whole package together. And so this particular webinar is a prime example of that kind of thing. We have two very distinguished guests with whom I'll introduce in a moment, but I just wanted to just pitch the Center for Ethical and Effective Organizational Leadership, which is something that sort of grew out of the current pandemic that all of us are dealing with right now. It's aside from our regular degree program, and it's an effort to respond to what we think will be the needs of our Muslim community coming out of this difficult situation. We're trying to put together a series of workshops, and we're raising money for it right now to travel around the country and to deal with three issues. One is mental health, which we'll be talking about today. Second is how to understand crisis management from the Muslim tradition perspective. And the third will be having people think about, in terms of visioning and planning, what it means to be an effective professional working as an imam or youth leader or running a nonprofit or being a community chaplain in this particular day and age. What kinds of skills do I need? What kind of learning should I get? What kind of mentoring should I get? These are the three areas that we hope to travel around the country and help organizations with. And mashallah, we're raising money for it. And it seems that it's been very, very effective. So today, though, we're talking about counseling and cross-cultural communication. And quite frankly, it's a pitch about a course that we're offering on June 6th through the 10th that will be totally online, taught by myself and our two guests, which will focus on this issue of counseling and cross-cultural communication, which we think is something that's very much needed in the Muslim community. We strive to put this in a Quranic context. Allah Ta'ala says in Quran, Ya ayyuhalladhina, Ya ayyuhan nas, O humanity, ittaqu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum min nafsin wahida. O humanity, be mindful, be careful of your guardian Lord. Why? Because he created you from one person, and many of us know this to the end. And so it's the context, right? It's the context of cross-cultural communication. And it's also the context of doing counseling, of being of a help to other Muslims and other people as well. And so this is the flyer that many of you have seen that you got invited to, and there are the three of us, and this is May the 27th, mashallah. So the panelists for today are Dr. Rania Awaad. She's a clinical associate professor at Stanford University, and she's also director of the Stanford Muslims and Mental Health Lab. And I see the order there is wrong. And some of you may have heard of her through Khalil. She's very much on the front line. So she's a teacher, right? She's also a researcher, right? And she's a practitioner, mashallah. And myself, of course. And then there's Dr. Tahir Khwaja. He's a medical doctor, and his specialty is child and adolescent psychiatry. And he works at a VA center in the glorious state of Texas. And again, he's a specialist. He's a person who's studied Islam extensively, as well as a person who's a frontline clinician. These are two of the heroes that people are always talking about being on the front lines, because they work in real clinical practices while teaching about and thinking about what we should do as Muslims. This talk is co-sponsored by the Association of Muslim Chaplains, as usual, the Muslim Endorsement Council, and Rabata, which is the organization that's headed by one of our major faculty members, Dr. Tamara Gray, and we thank them for their co-sponsorship. And so what we want to set the stage with this talk is it's a talk about counseling and cross-cultural communication, but it's also a pitch about the course that we're offering June 6th through the 10th, which will be online through the same medium. Only the difference between it And that, and here is that that's shorter, of course. This is shorter. This is free. But the courses are part of our degree program if people want to audit them, and we are offering 50% off the normal tuition there. And so the instructors, as I said before, myself, I'm the primary instructor, which simply means that I'm the person who has to get the grades in and make sure that everything is done administratively for the course. And Dr. Rania and Dr. Tahir. We also have someone who just actually joined us today. We've been talking about this for a while. She's a teaching assistant for us, but she's also just recently got her Master's of Divinity from Bayan Claremont, and she's a staff chaplain. Again, we have both a person who is educated in a Western so-called contemporary setting, but also is a frontline person. She's one of those heroes that you talk about. And this is Sister Sandus, or chaplain, rather, Sandus Kolaki. And she's at the Hogue Presbyterian Hospital in Irvine, California. She might be watching us. We give a shout out to her. I'll be the contact person for the course, and we ask people not to phone me, but to text me if you need to reach me, inshallah. So let's talk a bit about the course, and then we'll launch into our discussion. The course covers some theoretical basis of counseling and provides baseline techniques for working with the Muslim American population as advisors. This course is not going to make you a counselor, right? My colleagues in this particular workshop in the class have spent many, many years, right, learning about the clinical issues. You cannot learn that in 5 days, right? You cannot learn that in 5 days. But the reason why we do this is because we think that anybody's in a primary position in our Muslim organizations ought to know something about counseling and mental health. So let's be clear that this is not a course that, you know, you're going to be a counselor at the level of my colleagues here. Personally, I've been doing pastoral counseling for about 3 decades. So it takes a bit, and there's a lot to it, and we should take it very seriously. But hopefully we'll open the door, and for those of you who want to go into it as a full-time thing, please do. And there's something called mental health first aid, which I am a certified trainer in. And I think we should think of ourselves as triage, because many of the people who come to us around counseling issues, all they need is a kind word or an ear. Our Prophet ﷺ was all ear. They need somebody to listen to them. And so I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, but don't think that if you take one course, not only here, but any place else, that you're going to become a seasoned clinician. I do mean seasoned, because a lot of, some of it's more art, in my view, and my colleagues may know better. Some of it's more art than science. And so some of it's, you know, what you learn on the job. So the topics covered in this include effective listening, giving and receiving feedback, assessing and negotiating cultural boundaries, cross-generational communications, mental health first aid, referral, and marital and premarital education. And it focuses on educating the leaders within our community, but anybody who gives services to the Muslim community is welcome to join. This is not only for Muslims. Anybody who gives services to the Muslim community, Muslim or somebody outside of our faith tradition, is welcome to join. And inshallah, they'll learn something about us. So the course objectives very quickly is to explain at least 5 concepts from Quran and the Sunnah of our beloved Prophet ﷺ that reinforce effective counseling and communication theory and practice, understand the difference and similarities between teaching the norms of Islamic practice and listening effectively to someone. Some of us don't understand that, you know, just simply telling somebody something's halal and haram usually isn't the first place to go. Compare and contrast modesty in Islam and modesty in the broader American society when it comes to effective cross-gender communications, because a lot of us work in settings where we work with people of the other gender, and we should know something about the comparison and contrast and the norms, choose between effective and ineffective communications, apply a clear understanding of effective use of mental health, first aid, and referral, assess and negotiate the most common cultural boundaries, both within the Muslim community and the broader community. And then a big part of this will be role play and case studies, demonstrate the ability to apply effective counseling, listening, communication techniques. Let me just say something about this. We almost did not have this course simply because I, for one, think it's more effective if you're going to get people to apply, that you actually see people and you see body language and all of that. But this is the era of coronavirus. We don't know when we will be able to reschedule this. And so we're going to make do with Zoom. There'll be small rooms. And inshallah, since there's a lot of teleconferencing that's going on by doctors and clinicians, inshallah, they'll prepare people for this. And then there will be a nice big paper to write at the end, as well as there's something called a 10-minute talk that you have to prepare, and I'll say some more about that in a moment. Let me speed up because I don't want to take all the time. So what does this course look like in real time? Day one, there'll be an introduction overview, and then 2 sessions on Muslims and mental health, and then 2 sessions on counseling and the Quran and the Sunnah. Day 2, there will be a review, and then 2 sessions on counseling families and youth, and 2 sessions on counseling and cross-cultural communication. And on day 3, there will again be a review. There will be a focus on correctional chaplaincy, and to a large extent, chaplaincy in this country began in the correctional field. So we'll talk about that. We'll look at military and hospital chaplaincy. Chaplain Sandus particularly will be helpful with that. We'll look at community chaplaincies and what possibilities there are for, this is a new field for chaplaincy. What does it mean and how does it work? And we'll look at education chaplaincy as well. That's on day 3. Day 4 becomes much more interactional. The first 3 days are really the 4 of us, actually, myself, Dr. Tahir, Dr. Rania, and Chaplain Sandus will be doing a lot of presenting, but will be interactive, inshallah. But it'll be a lot of presenting because we want to give you a good theoretical base. But day 4 and 5 will be, you'll get a chance to talk. You will be required, if you're a student, to give a student 10-minute talk on an issue that you either think that has not been dealt with effectively in terms of counseling and cross-cultural communication, or simply you think it should be talked about more. And we'll send you a rubric for that, inshallah. By this weekend, things are moving along. And so every student will have to give this. This is a part. If you're a graduate student and this is a graduate level course, you ought to be able to present your work. You ought to be able to communicate effectively. So every student will have to do this 10-minute talk, and every one of you will have an opportunity. It's one of the reasons why there are only 15 slots in this course. And I checked before I went online, 8 of those slots are filled. So if you're thinking about getting in this course, it will be on a first come, first served basis. And we think it'll be a richer course if we limit it to 15 people and not, of course, with Zoom, you can go with many, many people. But inshallah, we will use the 10-minute talk as a way of engaging you. Then there'll be several role plays. We have a particular way of doing it where it's not just focused on the role players, but there are teams that develop the role plays. And each one takes a good deal of time, at least 90 minutes, simply because there are a lot of nuances in working with people one-on-one. I've never done it on Zoom, but I think with telecounseling, we should be getting ready for the new normal. And then on the final day, there'll be a couple more role plays. We'll be talking about, well, what does all of what we've done in the 4.5 days before, what does it have to do with the real life situation that we deal with? And then finally, we will have some closing reflections. We always evaluate what we do, and we'll talk some more about that final paper. So that's the course, and that's what we will be focusing on the 5 days, June 6th through the 10th. As I said, there are 7 slots left in there. The required texts in that course are an excellent text by Ahmed and Amr, Counseling Muslims, the Handbook of Mental Health Issues and Interventions. To those people who already signed up, who are listening, you ought to have this book, and you should read the first 3 chapters. You'll get an email about this, but we're going to start with the first 3 chapters of this book, inshallah. And then another book, because marriage relationships is so important in our community and we're having difficulties with it, is a book by a friend of mine, Dwelling Tranquility, which I've used in my pastoral counseling over the years, and Islamic Roadmap to the Vibrant Marriage. And of course, there will be that additional materials assigned by us, which we'll be sending to you, inshallah, by this weekend. again, yeah, this is the basis of our knowledge is ilm, or wahi, rather, revelation from Allah. So just wrapping up with a couple of commercials. Join us. This is a one-time, hopefully 50% off summer course fees. You, in order to join the course, unlike the webinar, you just click and you join. And to join the course, you have to apply either as an auditor or as a part-time or full-time student. And that takes a little bit of effort. So if you're interested in the course, you ought to get started. And then there's another course where I'm also the lead trainer. This course is part of our Master's in Islamic Studies and our Master's in Divinity program, by the way. And the second course is a part of our Master's in Nonprofit Management, which is called Foundations of Effective Organizational Leadership, where again, it's text and context. We look at, what is effective organizational leadership within our tradition and look at contemporary issues related to this. We're raising money. Go to Launch Good. You'll find stronger leaders, stronger communities for this effort, the effort that we're going to be taking around the country in the post-pandemic workshops. So please, you can donate now at Launch Good, and you put in stronger leaders and stronger communities. You'll find that, mashallah, of a $100,000 goal, we've raised about 80 to 90K. And we're gonna fulfill that obligation. We're gonna start, inshallah, in Dallas in October, depending on the situation, but we're already planning 3-day workshops to build capacity around mental health, capacity around understanding crisis management from the Muslim perspective, capacity around personal and organizational development. So that's it, finally, we're going to launch into our discussions. Welcome, Dr. Rania. Welcome, Dr. Tahir. Sorry that I took so long with that opening.
Thank you.
All right, so my opening question is, why psychiatry? I actually know quite a few Muslim psychiatrists, but I think most Muslims don't know a lot of psychiatry. So either one of you, why did you choose this particular field? Either one of you.
So since Dr. Rania is on mute, I'll go ahead and begin. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. When I was younger, I always had this feeling that I wanted to do something. And this is like the cliche answer, right? SubhanAllah. But I'm going to give it, and we're gonna get through it. But I wanted to do something to be of use to the ummah, and it's something that I say to my own kids and to other kids who are sort of coming through, that always think about something that you can do, whatever you do professionally, what can you do? How can you use that for the deen and to benefit the deen? And so that's the thought process that I had when I was a little bit younger. And then, I didn't necessarily know that medical school was the way that I would end up going, but alhamdulillah, when Allah put medical school in my path, then and I came to the tail end of it, and I'm thinking, okay, what can I do to be of benefit to the ummah? At that time, which was in 2002, there were not very many Muslim psychiatrists and very many Muslim counselors, but I had a predilection for listening more than I talked, as just part of my upbringing. So I thought that it might be beneficial for myself as well as for the Muslim Ummah to be able to learn more about that and to go into that. And it's turned out, subhanAllah, that it's been an amazing, subhanAllah, journey of education for me. Just the opportunities of being able to teach other people about this amazing field. So it's been a blessing through and through. Alhamdulillah.
We're kindred souls. I love to teach myself, mashallah. And actually, I went to graduate school for the same reason, that I felt that I could be of more benefit to the Muslim community with an advanced degree in terms of this notion of building institutions. Dr. Rania, we've unmuted you.
Yeah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. I don't quite have a similar story, unfortunately, I have to say. I didn't find psychiatry. Psychiatry sort of found me more than anything else. The way the story goes is I had studied the Sharia sciences first, and that's what I was doing in the community primarily. When I entered into medical school, it was mostly, of course, to help, and serve, but I was really focused on women and women's health, and I thought I would go into obstetrics, and up until the very last, rotation of medical school, advanced rotations, if you will, that's what I was geared towards. All my letters of recommendation said OB on them, just to show how much, I was that kid who was like, no. Psychology, psychiatry, we have nothing to do with that. Muslims, that's not our thing at all. MashaAllah, that's not something. And I didn't take a single psychology course in undergrad, nor was I, necessarily interested. And so, MashaAllah, Allah has a way of humbling you. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
In reality, the doing the work in the community and teaching, and once you start to teach, you also start to find people asking very personal questions, and it became very clear to me very quickly that as much fiqh and sharia that I had under my belt to answer, I could not answer some of the more complicated questions in interpersonal issues. And right around that same time too, and I have to give credit where credit is due, my own husband, who was also a sheikh in our local community, said, look, most people are going to be trained to deliver babies, can do so, but not everybody has that sharia grounding in order to really go into a field like mental health and really help the Muslim community. And before I knew it, I had switched gears, so much so that during my interviews for residency, I had people asking me, so are you going to become an obstetrician or something? I had a lot of explaining to do, mashallah, but that was the path that was written. Alhamdulillah for it.
So let's segue into my second question. Muslims and mental health are often very difficult to use these terms in the same sentence, particularly on the front lines where, in Masajid. I've been the chair of the board of a Muslim center here in New Haven, Connecticut. And you don't often hear these terms talked about together. Could you sort of talk about what your notion is about why these terms are not often connected? Either of you. Dr. Tahir, why don't you come on?
So Muslims and mental health, I think that everyone sort of recognizes that there's something under the rug or something in the closet that we don't talk about, and that's mental health, or that's that's the fact that I'm not doing well today, or in the past week, or in the past month, or in the past couple of years. So a lot of times we feel like we don't, when Allah says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub," that isn't it by the remembrance of Allah that hearts find peace. And so then I feel like sometimes we as a community feel like if I'm not at peace, then maybe there's a problem with my remembrance. And if there's a problem with my remembrance, then maybe there's a problem with my deen. And if there's a problem with my deen, then maybe I'm just not a good Muslim. So maybe it's better for me not to acknowledge that I'm not at peace, right, and just to tell you that, everything's fine. I'm great. I do have some new abdominal pain, which has never been, and I'm having chronic headaches, and I've got high blood pressure, and I've got diabetes, which is all a manifestation of the mental health, not being at peace. But just because I feel like I have this misconception that I'm not a good Muslim because I can't remember Allah properly, or I'm not doing good remembrance.
Right.
So I feel like sometimes we feel like Muslim and mental health in the same sentence is difficult for us to admit to on our, for ourselves. Wallahu a'lam.
Dr. Rania.
It's interesting. It's if I get started on this discussion, Dr. Jones, what's going to happen here, mashallah. I get really excited about talking about, our heritage as Muslims and how much we've really come how incredibly advanced we were in our understanding and treatment and holistic understanding of mental health treatment from our, noble predecessors, and how, the first Islamic hospitals, the first psychiatric hospitals in the world were within Muslim lands and Islamic institutions, and how advanced all of the therapies were related to treatment of mental health in stemming from Muslim thought well before this ever entered into Europe, and well before what became, Eurocentric psychology and psychiatry. So for me, it's always one of those questions that, like, and I know, because like I said, I was that person who was like, no, we have nothing to do with this. And as I discovered my own, research and, work that happened, to realize, wow, not only are we so far gone from our own tradition and knowing our legacy, so to say, but it's so unfortunate to know that we have adopted that stigma that didn't actually exist in Muslim understanding and Muslim lands in its form.
So how do we get there? How do we go from being the leaders? This is a question for us globally in a sense, but in this particular issue, I think for over 500 years, people don't understand. If you study world history, over 500 years, Muslims ruled most Christians for 5 centuries. Al-Andalus is an example. If you go and study history, but we've forgotten that somehow we always think of ourselves as being the oppressed and the victim, and we won't go into that, the whole victimization thing. It does strange things. But Dr. Rania, you've done a lot of research on this. How do we get from being the leaders to feeling like this is taboo?
That's the $1 million question. I think a lot of the research that still needs to be done, and actually is the connecting the dots to figure out exactly what happened. There are some theories, probably very valid and robust theories, but there's still more work to be done. Probably this semester at Stanford, I've been teaching a course called Islamic Psychology, and I had the students for their midterm for their midterm papers, actually research these hospitals, these institutions, these Dar al-Shifa or Bimadistans that were places of healing, particularly for mental health in Muslim lands, spanning from, the advent of Islam, literally, all the way until Ottoman times. And what was clear to us in our research that we were doing is that it continued to be a robust offering in Muslim lands until colonization happened. And with colonization comes, of course, an adoption of, different mentalities. Also a weakening of the system that was all of the schools. If you look at all the schools that were attached to the medical schools, essentially, or other institutions that were attached, they all changed from Arabic to foreign languages. Islamic studies was no longer taught within these institutions. There was just a weakening of the very fabric of people that were then becoming the healers, if you will. And we just adopted almost wholesale that mentality of this is a taboo issue.
That sounds right to me.
It's painful. It's painful to even hear that or recognize that or admit that. SubhanAllah.
Yeah, but let me segue a little bit. There's a gender component of this. My experience as a pastoral counselor in our community with my wife, Martina, over the past 20 years or so, it's always harder to get the guys to come and sit down, whether it's as part of a couple or individually. Time to time, I'll sit with somebody individually, but usually that's above my pay grade. I really, usually if somebody needs to sit individually, I usually refer them to a clinician, but I'm most often either by myself or with my wife talking to a couple, and it's usually very difficult. And so we'd be remiss if we wouldn't talk about that piece of the mental health, right? And I understand this is a general issue, if you look in the general population, that this is an issue, but I think it has a particular stigma for males in the Muslim community. Dr. Tahir?
So, SubhanAllah, in fact, I was just texting with a patient who was seeking an appointment, and she said that this is literally today, it just happened today, that she said, this is for my husband and I need to bring him in, and he's got a lot of issues and he doesn't want to admit them. And I said, well, I'm no longer in New Jersey, I'm in Texas. She said, oh, I'm not sure how I can do that. So I just sort of interacting with Muslim men on a day-to-day basis, I think that there's some level of I think healthy pride that Allah has given me the obligation to manage my family, and I have obligations to provide for them and care for them and so on and so forth. And so then I think that sometimes that becomes the obstacle, that sentiment becomes the obstacle, that I don't want to, just what we were talking about earlier, I don't want to admit that perhaps I'm faltering in what I'm able to provide, or I'm faltering in my stability, my personal stability, or in the stability that I'm able to provide for the household.
Yeah.
And you know, and then we often get ourselves into denial, or then, you know, subsequently anger, if we're challenged on that, or if we feel like, even though it's not a challenge necessarily, it's somebody who genuinely actually really cares for us and wants the betterment of the family, and of the kids, for example. But a lot of times it's just very difficult for us to allow that leeway and that option for, hey, maybe I'm the one that needs a little bit of help.
Right. It's a very hard thing. You want to add anything to that, Dr. Rania?
I think actually that was a wonderful.
Okay. I've taught this course called The Power of Prejudice at the undergraduate level in the honors course over the past few years, and in it we talk about gender differences, and it's talking about it in general. And there's something called the Brannon Masculinity Scale, and basically it's a scale that asks men and women in the general population what makes a real man. And I think that we have these concerns, and I'm testing my memory here. There were 5 components. One is no sissy stuff, right? You only do things that are manly, right? Secondly is the give them hell dimension. You always should be the one that giving people a hard time. That's a part of your manliness. The third one is the sturdy oak, right? If you don't cry, real men don't cry. And so, and I only introduced this concept to say that we Muslim men, in my experience, tend to drink this from the broader society, which is a society, and then we add the overlay that you talked about, Dr. Tahir, that notion that somehow I must not be a good Muslim and I must not be practicing my deen properly in order so I won't go because I won't show that weakness. All right, let's segue a bit. We have 2 clinicians sitting here, and we have a pandemic that's having us locked down. I would be remiss in not asking you, what advice can you give us in general? And I know you can't go very long, but you know, to people who are locked down in terms of maintaining their mental health, and particularly Muslims in doing so. Dr. Rania?
MashaAllah, you're right. It's been a really difficult time for so many people, and I think as much as, you know, we've been holding on, it's always so hard because there's not a clear end in sight. And there's a couple things I think to take a clear end in sight. Inshallah, there is an end in sight, but it's not so clear just yet. MashaAllah, when. But I think a couple things to really hold on to as Muslims. Some of this applies, I think, broadly, but some of them also specify some specific things. One is that I really think that, as you mentioned, it ties directly to what you were saying, kind of being that caregiver, that caretaker. People depend on me, so people bottle up a lot. And one of the main things that we're really suggesting to folks to get through this is to be sure that they're going to talk, and actually to trusted individuals. That could be, of course, family members, but it could also be a professional, depending on the person's situation, who they're sheltered with, if there's anyone around or not. But also listening. And I think that's one thing that we're finding with a lot of the therapy that we're doing. People they're feeling incredibly isolated, and having that listening ear, checking in on each other virtually is really important. Number 2 is really just decreasing that consistent overstimulation of watching the news and news intake. I think that's been really detrimental for so many people. It makes sense why we're all kind of hour by hour checking the news, but it's been really wreaking havoc on a lot of people. You know, number 3, I would say the self-care, which of course is a buzzword in mental health, but this kind of self-care is more than just, you know, eat well, sleep well, exercise, which are very important. But I would add to that the dimension of spiritual self-care. As Muslims, we actually have that tradition. We are able to connect to the divine if we take the time. We just came out of the month of Ramadan. It's accepted, inshallah, for everyone. But I think it's so incredibly important as we juggle the working from home for those who are, and kids at home for many, if they have them, and just the whole big juggle that's happening for so many people. That spiritual self-care is so key here. And I think that's where making sure the momentum of whatever happened in Ramadan continue on through this. I think it actually was a rahmah, the mercy that Ramadan came when it came in the middle
Yeah,
of it.
mashallah. I feel that way. We got a message from one of our watchers. IT folks, they're not hearing Dr. Rania as well as they're hearing the other two of us. You might want to check that. Dr. Tahir, do you have anything to add to what she said?
So I think that there's not much more. I think, mashallah, she addressed the question very well, mashallah, tabarakallah. There is one specification that I would just sort of remind everybody about, that the power, the healing power of sunlight, where we end up being cooped up inside our homes or our apartments or wherever we are sheltering in place, and we end up not getting as much sunlight. And there's so much shifa there, not just in terms of vitamin D, but just in terms of your own emotional well-being when you have the sun hit you. Even if you sit outside in the sun in your backyard, I'm not saying I'm not saying necessarily go out and mingle, but you can sit in the backyard, you can sit in the front yard, you can sit, take your cup of tea or cup of coffee and just drink it outside instead of inside. It's a simple change, right? A simple adjustment, but just getting that sunlight and getting those, photons inside your eyes, there's tremendous healing in the power of sunlight.
So just to turn a little bit to the course that the three of us will be teaching with Chaplain Sandus in a few weeks. The Islamic Seminary of America sees itself as focused on building capacity within the Muslim community, particularly capacity around women in leadership, and particularly capacity in communities that are economically strained, particularly inner city communities, but just generally building capacity. Why, I mean, this is a big softball question, but why would a course like this be important to that kind of capacity building for Muslim organizations? Dr. Rania?
Yeah, mashallah. It's actually a great question. And I think when I think about mental health and I think about counseling, even if this is somebody's intro into counseling, whether they go on to actually go to do more with it, or whether they're going to be in their community a leader, whether that be, an actual religious leader, spiritual leader, community leader, organizer, etc., youth leader, etc. The reason it's really important is from all the research that we've done related to mental health, particular to the Muslim community. When we ask people the questions, who would you go to first? Who would you go to first if you thought you had a mental health condition or concern? The answers, and this has been repeated multiple times in multiple surveys now, the studies, the answer almost always, and this comes in this order. First, it's family, and that's not true of everybody, but that's usually the overwhelming. Then comes friends, and eventually comes the imam, religious leaders, or other kind of community leaders. The reason that's important is because, all of us, every single person watching this, every single person, interested in this topic, you are, especially if you're talking about leadership and building capacity for leadership, those are folks that are going to be the front line. They're going to be the people that others go to first. Mental health professionals are like way later down on the list in terms of when they finally show up to actual care and actual treatment. So that means that everybody else, friends, family, and leaders, community leaders, they are the ones that are going to actually be the first line people to field any sort of mental health requests or needs. And that's why this course becomes crucial, because then you have some literacy and some amount of figuring out, well, what do I do? And who do I refer to? And when have I reached my limit? So many people, inadvertently cause more harm, not because they mean to, of course it's inadvertent, but because they don't know when they've reached their capacity and their limitation and need to refer to the professionals.
Yeah, I think many of us feel like we're a failure if we refer people. I learned this, I actually began working in a clinical setting, I'll date myself, a half century ago in a drug treatment program. I learned fairly quickly that you can get out of your element very early in the game, simply because there are some people, you cannot help everybody simply because you're from the same ethnic background, you're related to them, or you're their imam, or your mother, father, sister, brother. You need to say, hey, this is, you need to be able to say that this is something I cannot do, and you need somebody who has more training than I do. Dr. Tahir, would you like to add to that?
So as Dr. Rania was speaking, a couple of thoughts just sort of occurred to me that it is in fact our primary care providers like internists and family practice doctors and pediatricians who are the #1 prescribers of antidepressants, for example, and also of stimulant medications. And the reason for that is that folks, just like Dr. Rania was counting down the list, your primary care physician would, for a mental health problem, for depression, would come before the psychiatrist or the counselor. And so then it ends up being that, the research bears this out, that PCPs, are primary care physicians, are the #1 prescriber of antidepressants in this country.
That's a little scary to me, by the way. But go ahead.
So I think that however, what Dr. Rani was saying was that our clergymen sort of might even come before our physicians, right? Our primary care docs. So, but that just sort of lends more to her point, which was an excellent point, that it's, and it goes back to one of our original questions, that it's really taboo to talk to a psychiatrist. It's really difficult for somebody to say, I need to talk to a therapist. And then the other thing that I feel like this course, I'm hoping that it allows people to become a little bit more free to be able to express themselves, #1. #2, because we're going to be teaching students of the Deen, and they will become, folks that will be approached by just the general population, that, hey, I've got this, but my mother did this, my father did this, my, whoever, such and such, had this happened between us. I really want to convey to our students that you know where to say I don't know.
Right.
And that's true. That's what you were talking about earlier, that in our effort to be tremendously helpful and be the one to, like Superman, to come in and save the day, we might actually end up causing a little bit more harm than good. So, a 5-day course like this is not going to make us a therapist. That takes years. That takes, sometimes decades. But what it can do is it can help us to understand what where to say, I don't know. Imam Malik even used to say, I don't know. And travelers who would come from far outside of Medina and ask him a series of 12 questions. And, Imam Malik would say, I don't know. And then the person asked, I came from such and such a place. Mm-hmm. And what am I going to go and tell them? Tell them that Imam Malik said he doesn't know. And then he answered one of those 12 questions. And that person had to go back and with that one answer, because Imam Malik, the one that we have a madhab named after, and that whose madhab a good portion of the world follows, knew when to say, I don't know. So it is not out of ignorance. It is actually out of extreme education that a person says, you know what, I don't know, but I know where to find out. And so then you have somebody on speed dial that you can say, hey, listen, I've got or a quick text message. And I receive these text messages all the time from friends, like from friends in the clergy, Muslim clergy, right. That, hey, I've got this case. And they just send me a quick 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 lines. And then I might say, okay, refer to the hospital, or, give them some advice if it's appropriate.
Yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation. The time is going on. We're going to have to switch to our viewers, but we're going to have to talk some about cross-cultural issues. And so let's talk a little bit about that. And I had several questions, but let me try to wrap them into one. Islamic centers and Muslim nonprofits, they come under a lot of criticism, at least in my view, for how they handle both cross-cultural issues, that is, people who don't belong to the primary cultural group of that center, and or gender issues. There's the third space movement in this country is all about that. What's your assessment and what are your recommendations? I know this is a big question. What are your recommendations that we as Islamic centers and Muslim nonprofits, what are some things you think we might think about doing to deal with this? Because it is an issue, for sure. Who wants to tackle that first?
I can give it a little bit of a try, inshallah. Absolutely. I think the disparities are very clear. I think they're across, like you said, gender lines. I think they're also across racial, ethnic, socioeconomic lines. They're really across all the various lines. And for anybody who's grown up in communities where, in one central area, there were so many different masajid, but they were split across cultural groups or across, they were referred to as, that's the Arab mosque, that's the Desi mosque, that's the Bosnian mosque, that's the, so on and so forth. It's you know what I'm referring to, mashallah. And then in the gender thing, I think is a really important piece too. And I say this as somebody who actually directs a women's nonprofit on, educating women in Islam and Deen, and girls. And I can't tell you, this past Ramadan, for example, considering that everything went virtual, how much the woman benefited by the very mere fact that they were home and able to partake in. So many had never even tried to pray Tarawih before, because it was the men of the family who would take off and go to the masjid, if there was even a space in the first place for them in the masjid, right? So that's a whole other can of worms that we maybe won't open quite today. But the concept of doing i'tikaf, or doing, the spiritual seclusion, or doing full-on Tarawih prayers, or really engaging spiritually, there is such a gender disparity, so many women, and access to ilm, to knowledge, right? So we can go on and on about this topic. But what amazed me the most, I don't think I expected this kind of turnout, but with just very little advertising, in any one of our women's qiyams virtually, we'd have 1,200, 1,500, 1,600 women.
SubhanAllah.
Wow, mashallah.
And when you realize the sheer number of people, and when most of them are writing and saying, I've never done this before in my life, then you realize that the amount of disparity that's actually out there, spiritually speaking, right, in terms of access for women. So I have a lot to say about that, but I'll get off my soapbox for the moment.
We'll talk some about it in the course.
Absolutely.
Dr. Tahir.
I think that if these sort of groups that are marginalized in any given masjid, if they're, I'm preaching to the choir here, obviously, but so I don't know if any of this information is going to get to where it needs to be. But if those sort of marginalized groups, if we as Muslims, just as Muslim leadership in any given center or any given masjid, can't make a conscious effort to bring those people into leadership or into, committees or, into some sort of forum where we can hear their complaints or hear what they have to contribute or hear what they have to say. I think that it will be beneficial, but I think that that's even an advanced step beyond, just first not pushing them out of the masjid.
Right.
SubhanAllah, as an example that happened to my own sister-in-law, where she, it was terrible. She was made to feel unwelcome because she was mistakenly taken as Arab, and I'm Pakistani, and it was Pakistanis who were speaking Urdu are saying, why do these people come to this masjid? And I'm just, Yani, we're supposed to be the light bearers of the deen to the world, and this is how we behave. So, Yani, first of all, not to push them out of, and not to push anyone out of the masjid, even if they come in wearing shorts. You can let them make their salah, and then you can tell them that, you know, or whatever, you can have a discussion, cordial discussion with them. But then also after that, to actually bring them into, you know, listening to them. And that's one thing that I want to talk about in this course, that listening more than you speak is really the crux of communication.
This is going to seem a little bit out of left field, but I think it's important to say I woke up this morning to the tragedy in Minnesota, wherein a person, simply because he's African American, he was killed. You know, he was killed. My heart aches as a Muslim, because I think I came into Islam in about 40 years ago through reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, because I was, quote, black nationalist at that time, and felt that Islam, like El-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, had the answer to the racial problem in this country. I still think that, by the way, but we drink the Kool-Aid, if you know what I mean. We imitate other people in the way we run our masajid and our nonprofits, and we don't understand the beauty of the inclusive, what I call the mighty multicultural community of Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. That's how I view it, and that we somehow miss, we're so busy looking at the text, right? We're so busy looking at the text and making sure that we understand a particular hadith, that we miss the context and the power, the integrated power of the early Muslim community. My heart aches that we are not at the front line of doing something about the ethos in this country that led to that young man's killing. And of course, I've had this happen to me. I lost a son 23 years ago under similar circumstances. But I think I know I'm a little bit on a soapbox here, so we need to get back to the top. I think that we blow an opportunity to raise the bar for this country by not raising the bar within our community in terms of cross ethnic, racial, and also gender as well. I feel the same way about that. That was a little bit preachy. So any thoughts you have, or we'll move on. Okay. So alhamdulillah, we should wrap up. I have a question from one question from the audience. She is saying, I'd love to hear the intersection of salah and regular mindfulness meditation practice. Either one of you want to tackle that one?
Sure, mashallah. I hope you'll be taking this course, because I think you'll be learning a whole lot more about it, hopefully very soon, inshallah. But in brief, I think the concept of mindfulness meditation that is so vastly prescribed by any primary care doctor, by any psychologist, it's like the thing, right, that people prescribe these days. And honestly, unfortunately, even though it comes from an original religious tradition, it's very much secularized. And that to me is problematic as a Muslim. And I think what you're hinting at is exactly this question of, like, where is that intersection between our own faith, our indigenous kind of faith practices like salah, like prayer, and this concept of a regular mindfulness meditative space. And absolutely, salah not only does that if it's done kind of with a kind of mindfulness, but not only that, but we have other practices outside of ritual prayer, outside of ritual salah prayer, that also really bring to light this very deep Islamic tradition of what I would call not just meditation, but contemplative meditation, tafakkur. And it's really worth going through those steps and really understanding how to do tafakkur, because what I think is that we definitely have something that's much, much more powerful than a secularized version of meditation. And, dare I even say, then, meditation in its Western context, which is, has been derived from the Buddhist tradition, but doesn't quite jive well with our Islamic principles of, connecting to the divine, because it has other principles to it. So there's more to say on that, but I hope that will happen in the course very soon.
And I think that, a good important aspect of mindfulness, particularly when it comes to a meditation in the salah, is to be able to understand what it is that we're saying. And it's hard to imagine that you could focus on what you're saying to the creator of the world, so to your creator, to the Lord and the King, if you don't understand what it is that we're repeating day in and day out, what does Maliki Yawmiddin really mean? How is he the king of the day of judgment? And when that sort of washes upon you, that you can imagine lends significantly to your ability to sort of focus and be in awe of the creator of the world. So when we're doing meditation outside of Salah, like what Dr. Rania was talking about, just sort of thinking about the creations of the heavens and the earth, and thinking about, recently I was studying a little bit about astronomy, and just the size of the universe. And then Allah says in the first surah of the 29th part that we have, created 7 levels of the heavens, and the first as-sama ad-dunya, the heaven that is surrounding the earth, is adorned with lights and that are used as sort of pellets for the shayateen, that go for the devils that go up to listen. And so you can start to imagine and do tafakkur and understand, right? That's something of understanding. You understand the size of the universe, and then you can start to reflect and then meditate on the beauty of that. But when we're in our salah, which is supposed to be a meditative state, and we have no idea a lot of times what we're saying, that it just doesn't lend towards meditating.
I'm so looking forward to working with the two of you and Chaplain Sandus. I think this is going to be, it's going to be a powerful learning for myself. Indeed. All right, so we're going to wrap up now. First, there's a follow-up question to you, Dr. Tahir, and then we'll ask Dr. Rania to give a closing comment or something that she thinks people should understand about counseling and mental health. And then we'll give you a chance, Dr. Tahir, to do the same. And then I'll make some comments, and Dr. Rania will close with dua. So Dr. Tahir, the follow-up question for you is, I missed the point. What do you mean the marginalized group being pushed out of the masjid? You said it a few questions back, and one of our watchers didn't understand the point.
Yeah, so I wasn't signifying or identifying a particular group. It was, in any masjid, for example, there is a group that is sort of seen as being in charge, and perhaps there might be a group that is seen as being marginalized in that particular masjid. Now, in various parts of the country, in various masajid around the country, that marginalized group, or that lesser sort of respected group, in whatever way, whether they be, whatever race they are, whether they be whatever age they are, be they elderly, be they the youth. But perhaps there are many masajid, I don't want to make generalized statements, but perhaps there are many masajid in which there is a specific group of people that is not respectfully heard at times.
And that can push them out. That often leads to people, I've seen this phenomena in masajid. Dr. Rania, closing thoughts that you think people should leave this discussion of counseling and cross-cultural communication with?
Well, first, I really hope that they'll be able to attend with us, inshallah, in another week, the course. But in case that doesn't happen, I think I would like to leave everybody with some hope, inshallah, that there's actually been quite a bit of work related to this concept of, Muslim mental health and integrating Islam into the counseling, psychotherapy kind of space. So first, Dr. Jones, you mentioned a few times the Khalil Center, and I really would point people in the direction of the Khalil Center to see, what all has been happening. But another piece of good news that I think is really helpful is some of the work that we've been writing. In case people can't do the course, but want to read a little bit more about what we've been working on, this concept of, Khalil Center is coming out with the book of, integrating Islamic introducing Islamically integrated psychotherapy. And I think that would be really interesting for people to hear. So it takes so much of all the various things we've talked about today, everything from the historical aspects, there's chapters on that, and really talking about how to integrate it, even the question on salah and meditative practices. You know, how do you take the concepts we understand from the Quran and Sunnah into counseling? Because now you actually have actual clinical centers that people can reference, and not only have Muslim clinicians, which I think is very strong, but actually integrating Islamic spirituality into the therapy process, which I think is very unique and key to our community, inshallah. So I hope that's some good news that people can take away with, even if they're not necessarily joining us, but I hope they will, inshallah.
So Dr. Rania, I'm a bibliophile. That's how I ended up being a college professor. I love books. And when you mentioned this in our conversation before, I pre-ordered that book. So you can, it's about 60 days away from release. There's something called a book depository that oversees that. Normally you get it for a little less and they'll send it as soon as it comes out. And of course, there's something called DLRs. This is for my students, by the way, our students coming in. There's something called DLRs.com where I go shopping for books because they give you the best used price and all of that. So they should get on it for those books. But name the book again, Dr. Rania, for those who might want to pre-order it. And want
sure. It's called Introducing Traditionally Integrated Islamic Psychotherapy. So I know it's a big mouthful, but TIP is the acronym for the therapy, inshallah. And I hope it's useful. It's definitely on Amazon, and it's also the publisher's Routledge for those who are looking directly.
Right. And you can find it for a little cheaper by putting her name in the title, and you can find it, inshallah. Dr. Tahir, what do you want to leave people with as we wrap up this discussion?
So I think that as we're embarking on this journey, sort of all of us together, we also want to call on the mercy of Allah and continue to remember that dua, whatever language it is a tremendous benefit to the believer. And it's important for us to always remember that whatever problem or difficulty we or somebody that we know is going through, dua is, and prayer and supplicating and asking of Allah and of Allah's mercy is always a benefit to us, and that should always be in the forefront of our minds.
Inshallah, this is a major takeaway from Ramadan. You know, that the remembrance of Allah, the intensifying of the salah, and the intensive activities that Dr. Rania talked about, we should try to take as much of that into the rest of our lives, inshallah. So, mashallah, like I said, I'm looking forward to this course, even if students aren't, because I learned so much. I mean, one reason I love being a professor is that my wife will tell you I spend a lot of time preparing. I never ever do the same course twice because I'm always trying to think about, you know, what new things have been thought about and what things can we apply. And so, inshallah, I look forward to working with the two of you and Chaplain Sandus. And for folks who are interested in the course, this webinar is free. The course costs money, but the course is being offered at 50% off our regular fees. And you can see that this will be a bargain, you know, just to listen to people like this, and well as Chaplain Sandus is a chaplain who's on the front lines. These are people who both, Chaplain Sandus, both have the contemporary education and the frontline experience. So I'm psyched, and so please join us. If you think this is an important effort, the kind of post-pandemic workshops where we'll be focusing on mental health and crisis management from our tradition, and focusing on how do you plan professionally for the future, and how do you do organizational development, then please go to Launch Good and donate, because inshallah, as soon as this stuff opens up, and we're targeting October, we've actually began to set dates in October. We're going to travel around the country trying to do this on a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday after Jummah, and then all day Saturday, then a half a day Sunday. And also we're planning to give individuals grants to take home so they can implement, so we're just not sitting talking, so they can implement their personal development plans, so they can implement their organizational plans. We need help. but we also have a responsibility to this country and to the world. I firmly believe that, and that in helping ourselves, we can fulfill that obligation that our Lord gave us. So thank you for joining us. May Allah Ta'ala accept this Eid and this Ramadan from all of us, and may He make our last day the best day and save us from the hellfire. Dr. Rania, you want to give us a closing dua, please?
اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Oh Allah, we ask you, Ya Rabbil Alameen, O merciful, to shower your mercy down upon us and to accept from us. Ya Rabbi, this gathering here, Ya Rabbi, that is gathered to remember you and to remember your servants and to help and be in the service of others, Ya Rabbil Alameen, accept it from us. And Ya Rabbi, accept the Shawwal from us and accept Ramadan from us. And Ya Rabbi, make us from those who are oft remembering. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala al-hadi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.